The sun has gone down at Hangman's Hill, and the ghost at Misery Corner isn't walking tonight. So, welcome to the Weird Tales Radio Show, your weekly fix of ghost stories, urban myths, witchcraft, magic, and folklore. And now, here's your host, writer, award-winning journalist, best-selling author, and sometime werewolf hunter, Charles Christian.
Hello and welcome to another episode of the Weird Tales Radio Show, the home of geek, folklore and paranormal entertainment with me, Charles Christian. As once again we delve into the worlds of weirdness, urban myths, history, geek culture, ghosts, magic, witchcraft, the occult, and anything else I think will intrigue you. Before we crack on with the show, we have an important anniversary to announce because this week, the 12th of August to be precise, marks the 175th anniversary of the coining of the word folklore. Yes, before then they didn't have the word. It was on the 12th of August 1846 that a William John Toms wrote a letter using the pseudonym of Ambrose Merton, I know not why, which was published in the Athenaeum magazine on the 22nd of August of that year. Toms wrote, "What we in England designate as popular antiquities or popular literature, though by the by it is more a law than a literature, that's L-O-R-E, law, as opposed to L-A-W, law, and would be more aptly described by a good Saxon compound, namely folklore, the law of the people. So, happy birthday, folklore. Long may you continue to intrigue us." Now on to this week's big interview where our guest is anatomist Janet Philp. Janet started work as a research scientist in 1989 and spent many years at the bench before moving into management. A growing interest in anatomy found her back doing research into the subject and the characters who populate the Anatomical Museum at the University of Edinburgh. This led to her writing a number of books, including Burke Now and Then, which retells the story of the notorious grave robbers Burke and Hare from the point of view of Burke's skeleton, which to this day still hangs in the Anatomical Museum of Edinburgh University. Janet also set up the science outreach group Anatomy Fundamentals in 2016 with the thought that life might be more interesting if people understood a little more about the bodies they experience it in. By way of a diversification to get anatomy students to think more about their subject, Janet has also given presentations on the neuroscience of zombies, whether dragons could ever fly, and what makes a werewolf tick, or not as the case may be. It's my great pleasure to be talking to Janet Philp. Hello, Janet.
Hello, Christian. Great to be talking to you.
And thank you very much for making the time. Now, I was piqued by an article in the British Fantasy Society's journal about werewolves. But first of all, tell me a little bit more about yourself and particularly your Anatomy Fundamentals and Anatomy Night activities.
Okay, so I am in the middle of anatomical studies, probably like 6-7 years into it now. I started off in sports studying anatomy, and then I have done the examinations of the Anatomical Society of Great Britain. So I'm at the point of the level of teaching anatomy to medical students, and I'm actually now 2 years into a 6-year PhD also in anatomical studies. One of the things that led me to that is the difference in access to anatomical education. And as a spin-off from that and general science communication, a colleague and I set up Anatomy Nights. I don't know if you're aware, there's a venture called Pint of Science, which takes scientists into pubs to discuss scientific things with the general public. So
right,
we were looking
yes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
We were looking at an anatomical version of this. And so we came up with the idea at an anatomy conference that we could dissect a heart, just a cow sheep heart that you can get from a butcher's. It's a byproduct of the meat industry. But hearts are very similar, so we could use this dissection to show the public what the heart was, how it worked, and explain some of the everyday terminology like plucking at heartstrings and these sorts of things, and how that all related, and to increase their awareness of the body that everybody's got.
Yeah.
So this started 3-4 years ago, and we coordinated it in the UK to start with. We were anatomists, so we coordinated it with other anatomists throughout the UK. So these are people whose day-to-day job is teaching anatomy. They tend to work at medical schools, and it then kind of took off. So just before lockdown, we actually had 14 venues, I think, across the country. Not across the country, across the globe. So it's quite interesting watching it on social media, because you could see. So it's coordinated. They were all around about the same day. We actually did it on Valentine's Day.
Right, yes.
And you could see the event starting in New Zealand, and then it went across Australia, Central Europe, got to UK, Scotland, Ireland, and then it went across into a couple of places that did it in America as well. So that was Anatomy Nights. The idea was to get people more acquainted with their anatomy from anatomists who aren't known for going out and talking in the public about what they do. And that's actually written up as a scientific study. We did another one on brains, which was along the same format. So when people come in, we get to have a sort of quiz as to how much they know. We then do a bit of a talk about. It's not particularly scientific. It's more about what how the heart or the brain fits in to general conversation, things like hole in the heart, what does that mean? And then we demonstrate it, and then there's a bit of a quiz at the end so we can see if people have actually retained any of the information. So yeah, we're doing that now. As I said, there's 14 places across the globe doing it, coordinated on my Valentine's week, looking at hearts. We then did one on brains with 6 venues, and just before lockdown, myself and Kat, who's the other founder of it, went over to Belfast and did one on lungs, which was a bit different because that was at the Science Museum in Belfast, and it was a Halloween event, purely adults.
Yeah.
And there had been quite a lot of drinking of the audience involved before we actually got to the dissection of that bit. So that was a bit different from the normal general public in a social setting. That's the essence of it. It has to be in a social setting, not in a university campus.
Yeah. What sort of social settings do you have? Because you're talking about scientists in pubs. I'd imagine if you were in a pub and you sort of produce a heart out of a jar, that wouldn't go down so well.
We did it in a pub in Edinburgh. We've done it. We have the old vet school in Edinburgh here is set up as a sort of science outreach centre, and we've done one in there. They did it in pubs down in Hull. The people in Lancaster did it in a primary school, his old primary school. It was done as a sort of show and tell for the kids that were there as well as their parents. The people in America, one of them did it in a winery, one did it in a brewery, and one did it in an art gallery. The Australians couldn't do it in a place that sold food because of Australian health and safety. So they had to go for other things. But essentially, a heart from a butcher's is just a piece of meat. So there aren't that many regulations. It's weird because when we do the dissection, we do it properly with lab coats and gloves and all the rest of it. But it is essentially a piece of meat from a butcher's.
Yes. And indeed, I don't know if people still eat it, but people used to buy it and stew it up and make it as a dish, didn't they?
Oh yeah, when I was a kid, I had heart stew.
Yes.
We actually did it again some time ago now with my husband. We went down to get heart stew, and you actually had to get it out of a freezer that was labelled food for dogs. So things have changed.
Yes, yes. Yes, I remember as a child on my way home from school, there was a butcher's, and next door to it, there was a shop that did all the lungs and giblets and all the other offal and things. And we used to sort of stare in horror at these strange things hanging up on walls.
I think it's actually coming back because there's more of a push now to make use of the whole animal from a sustainability point of view.
Yeah, it makes sense.
Yeah,
Yeah,
so you see people, eating things that we didn't used to sort of 5-10 years ago.
yeah, yeah. Anyway, now that's the background. Presumably now we're coming out of lockdown or regulations are easing a little bit. The anatomy nights is possibly going to be starting to take place again.
That is our hope for what are we in now? 2022.
Right.
That for the event that would have been in February there on that Valentine's Day, we will be able to be back in person. During
Excellent.
lockdown, we actually had a competition on social media for pumpkin carving, where we asked people to carve an anatomical image sort of into their pumpkin, and we got some phenomenal entries for that. And we got it judged by Alice Roberts and Dame Sue Black. They were the judges for it. And the winner was actually a medical student who carved a sort of fetus. It was like a pregnant sort of woman with the fetus and everything carved
Yeah.
with this pumpkin. It was absolutely phenomenal.
Yes. Right.
And she'd done it as revision for her medical exams.
Here's one I made earlier. Yes.
Yeah.
Wonderful. Now, getting back to the British Fantasy Journal element, you were using your anatomical knowledge to examine the concept of werewolves. Is it actually possible? What would be required for a human being to turn into a werewolf, as in all the best movies and TV shows and fiction? What got you thinking on that?
Well, it started with zombies. My son was studying for human anatomy, but actually was spending most of his time watching The Walking Dead. And so a conversation over breakfast kind of led to those people aren't walking properly. So what part of the brain do you think's damaged there? And they can't talk. So what part of the brain do you think might be damaged there? And this, what was meant to be sort of a 5-minute trying to get him into engage with his studies, led into sort of a big, long, hour-long conversation where he pulled up knowledge that he'd been taught of the brain that he really wasn't aware he had. And so it developed into a presentation that I ended up giving at the Science Festival here on the neuroscience of zombies, which was looking at the things that are portrayed in films, to which there was no science when the director came up with it, but, portraying how zombies are portrayed and how from that behaviour we might be able to work out which part of their brain has been affected. And this then led to conversations that you have with other anatomists, conferences in bars sort of thing, about flight and dragons with 2 and 4 legs and which would actually anatomically work. And then you get into depictions of things in films, which is where werewolves came in. And once started looking at that, and also obviously the tales of werewolves go way back to the very first story that was documented in human civilization, which is the Epic of Gilgamesh. And back then, people turned into wolves. That was it. It was a one-way transition, and it was usually a punishment. And it was only really when Hollywood got involved that we had this concept of they turn into a werewolf. Before then, it was a person or it was a wolf. It was sort of mixture of the two. But yeah, so the article was looking at the ability. I mean, obviously, a person and a wolf are two very different things, and they have completely different anatomy, and it would mean a change right down to the absolute change of every single cell and the amount of chromosomes. It would be an impossible thing to keep doing sort of once a month.
Yes.
But when you started looking at all the films about them, it was interesting, the sort of things that like that, I mean, it's very easy to criticise CGI going back the way that, that doesn't even look like a wolf. It hasn't got a big enough snout for all of its teeth to fit in. It's the most telling thing that kind of sort of you notice or I noticed in films was that the human rib cage is wider from side to side than it is to front to back. And a dog's or a wolf's is the other way. It's wider from front to back than it is side to side. And that makes somebody look very different. And obviously it would be hard to imagine that changing each time, but you can imagine a film where they actually depicted a werewolf with the change ought to change that rib cage as well. And it was just musings on that, of the sort of thing that the mouth's got to be bigger because it's got to fit in 10 extra teeth, and it's the rib cage has got to change. But then when you started looking at the films, you realised that nobody had actually tackled this really. The best, I was going to say the best portrayal, the most accurate portrayal of something that doesn't exist, if you like, was actually Harry Potter. I hate to say it, it does depict somebody, a wolf that runs but doesn't run like a wolf, because wolves don't have collarbones. Things that have collarbones can't run as nicely as a normal four-legged animal. But the wolf in that doesn't. It sort of lollops, and when it stops, it does stand upright, and it does have a rib cage that's a human rib cage that would make it, more sense for standing upright. But then when they convert to a person, he still does have collarbones. You can see them quite clearly. So it's interesting. It was just musings as to, if somebody actually directed a film that had somebody completely change into a wolf and completely change into a person, that's fair enough. But is there a middle ground where the person looks like they might anatomically be possible to change into a wolf? So yeah, that was what drove that.
Yeah, because one of the, as you mentioned, Hollywood, but I mean, it was sort of the Werewolf of London and Lon Chaney's Wolfman that really set the trend for our modern concepts of wolves, and particularly as you say, the person changes on a full moon from wolf to man and man to wolf and back again. And if you shoot them with the silver bullet, the wolf, it reverts to a man and so on. But that really seems to have been a figment of a Hollywood scriptwriter's imagination 90 years ago. And it's become accepted as werewolf lore since then, hasn't it, really?
It has, yeah. Kurt Sidermacher, the screenwriter for that film, came up with the whole full-moon silver bullet. I mean, there was a case, the famous case of the Beast of Gévaudan, which was shot with a silver bullet, but the stories are it was shot with a silver bullet, but whether we've actually got any proof of that, I don't know. And the sort of feeling behind it is the person who made the bullets didn't deliberately make them with silver because they thought that was going to have any sort of effect. It was just a wolf, described by some as being a relatively small wolf, but it was they had problems with it in France, and people were sent out to hunt it down, and it was eventually shot, and it was shot with a silver bullet, but it was a wolf.
Yes.
So yeah, I think it was in a sort of nod to that when they made the films, they thought, right, we'll have it shot with a silver bullet. And the changing back and forwards with the moon kind of gives you a bit of suspense, I guess, in films, because it's almost like a whodunit, which one of the characters is the werewolf? Can the people work it out?
Yes. You've got the time factor as well. Do the action either before the person is lost and becomes the wolf, or when they return. Yeah.
You stuck to the original stories of somebody who's punished and turned into a wolf, and that's it. It's not much of a film, really.
No. The end.
Yeah, that's it.
Yeah. What about the Werewolf of London, the movie they made, 20, 30 years ago?
Yeah, Werewolf of London. I had this time when I was writing this, when I sat and watched all these werewolf films, and it was quite illuminating watching them all. So yeah, the Werewolf of London, which was the big Oscar-winning conversion, where you see the conversion to start with. Well, that was the American Werewolf in London, wasn't it? The award-winning
That
one.
was it. Yes,
That was
American Will. Yeah.
yeah. So Rick Baker did the special effects on that, and there were two films in the same year. So there's the American Werewolf London and the Howling, and he did the special effects for both of them. So yeah, the kid falls to the ground, and you see the transformation. At that time, it was groundbreaking. It's the same person who did the special effects for the Thriller video. So you see the fingers growing, you see the sort of muzzle forming, and I must admit, when I watched that, I thought, all right, this is the film where you see the entire transformation, but you don't. When you look at it, you see the muzzle, you see the fingers, and then I think it jumps out the window.
Yeah.
And when you actually see it running through the night, you just see flashes of eyes and bits of teeth. So you don't see how it moves, or you think you see the whole transformation. It's amazing what your brain gets you to believe. But when you're actually looking at it, you really just see, I mean, it was groundbreaking, but you see the beginning of the transformation, jumping out the window, and then when you see the wolf, it's literally just flashes of bits. And then the fight at the very end, it doesn't look very realistic at all at that point. And then when it's killed, obviously it transfers back. It's tricky to get something that looks lifelike. I mean, some of the films just went for using Alsatians, which obviously look lifelike, but look like
Alsatians.
Alsatians, yeah. So, and obviously it's moved on massively now. I know they're not technically werewolves, but the people in the Twilight Saga, the CGI that is in that film, where they can change from a person into a wolf whilst doing a backflip in a couple of seconds in full view of the screen, has just taken the whole sort of genre of Hollywood films to a completely different level.
You're listening to the Weird Tales radio show with Charles Christian.
Yes, I mean, I mentioned American Werewolf because, as you say, at the time, everybody was saying, wow, this is really fantastic. And there's the best transformation ever because, previous memories are Lon Chaney Wolfman, which basically looks like a man with a bit hairy man, yes.
Mm-hmm.
What are the differences then that make the anatomy of a wolf incompatible with the anatomy of humans? I mean, you mentioned the collarbones, you've mentioned the rib cage, because of course, thinking about it, yes, an animal runs on the ground as opposed to walks upright. I mean, there's also the thing with the legs, isn't there? The sort of we bend at the knees, but the rear legs of an animal have a different format, don't they? Layout.
Well, yes and no. That they bend at the same knee. It's just everybody thinks the knee is in a different place. So if you imagine the back leg of a dog, everybody kind of thinks that bend at the back of the leg is the knee, where it's not. It's the ankle. So the knee
right.
is right up against the body. So they have the same bones. They have the same anatomical layout. They are essentially walking on their toes. And what you think of their toes is it is their toes, but the bone of the foot is actually the straight bit that goes up at the back of the leg. So, yeah, they're walking on their tiptoes.
Right.
So, obviously, various bones in your leg would need to change length for it to look like a wolf leg. And the same thing up at the top. Their elbow of a quadruped is right up against their body. So their actual bone of the humerus, the bone from their shoulder to their elbow, is really short in comparison. And the other bones elongate to give them a leg, which obviously changes all of their muscle length. I mean, you're talking about, for a person's change to wolf, it's a complete, absolute change of pretty much everything. And then obviously, because a human is upright and a wolf is on all fours, so the orientation of the heart and the actual organs all changes as well. There's very little that would be the same. I mean, the brain also, if you think about a human skull, the brain is inside the skull and it comes out through a hole at the bottom of that skull into the spine. Mm-hmm. And if you think of a dog, its skull is sort of looking forward and the spine comes out the back of it. Well, not, it still comes out the bottom, but it's got that big curve.
I've got, yes. Yeah.
So it's, it would involve a change that could threaten your entire neurological system because they're moving the brain and the spinal cord around. It's one of these things you say, well, it's just not physically possible. But clearly, if you're getting into the person's being magically transformed, then you get into the realms of magic. Anything is possible.
Yeah.
With that sort of thing. But it's interesting to debate it with anatomy students and with members of the public, because members of the public, it makes them think about their own body. Anatomy students, you suddenly discover how much they actually know. So it's like, okay, think about it. What would have to change? And if they've got the real grasp of anatomy, they can understand what would change and what the problem would be.
Yeah.
So yeah, there's one medical school that has an interesting project where they ask the students to design a sort of chimera, an animal that's made up of 3 different other animals, just so they can see, if you understand the systems in those animals, you will be able to join the plumbing, if you like, together. And so it's a sort of thought experiment as to how much you've understood about all the different body systems.
And you mentioned as well, wolves have far more teeth than humans.
Far more teeth, 10 times, 10 more teeth, not 10 times, 10 more teeth, but also they're massively wider. So the tooth that actually gives them the sort of thing of being a canine is a big sort of shearing tooth that they use for crushing the bones. And it takes up sort of 2-3 times the length of a jawbone of a human tooth. So the mouth has got to, the muzzle's got to grow massively.
Yeah. And you said their DNA is different. Obviously, it's different, but
yeah, they have a different number of chromosomes. So a person has 23 pairs of chromosomes normally, and a wolf has 39. So that's, those chromosomes are present in every single cell of the body. So if you're going to change from having human cells to having wolf cells, every single cell of your body has got to change.
Yeah.
Which brings up the interesting concept that it used to be, you go back to the old stories, the person changed to a wolf. But if we're bringing in the concept that there is such a thing as a werewolf that could appear as either of those, science kind of goes out the window. And a human has 23 pairs of chromosomes, a wolf has 39, but maybe a werewolf has, some number in the middle. And it can appear as either of these things.
Yeah. Yeah, that's intriguing. That I say, as you say, it just makes you think and realise, our bodies are different, and
yeah, things like that. That maybe there is in the fantasy novels, it's not a person that changes into a wolf. It's something that's different that can appear as either, and therefore, its anatomy is different. There's a similar argument that goes on about centaurs.
Centaur's the half man, half horse, isn't it?
Half man, half horse. So the debate you get in anatomy conferences with sort of like-minded people is, where are the lungs? Are the lungs in the chest of the man, or are the lungs in the chest of the horse? Which then leads on to the debate that actually you're discussing a person's anatomy and a horse's anatomy, and what you should actually be discussing is anatomy of a centaur. Why does it have to be man? Why does it have to be horse? It should be centaur.
Yeah. About dragons, you've mentioned them. I mean, the 2 things about dragons are, one, whether or not they can fly, and obviously from some of the medieval depictions of dragons, St. George and all that, they have such puny little wings, almost like chicken wings, that I don't think anybody would take it seriously that they could fly. But then when we head off to the Game of Thrones and more recent movies, the dragons have huge, massive wings that would appear to be more viable as carrying them. But then it's the thing about their arms and legs, isn't it? Because some depictions of dragons show them with 2 pairs of legs and wings. Some show them with 1 pair of legs and wings. And of course, birds are basically 2 legs and 2 wings. So where do they fit?
Yeah, it's interesting. So this is an ongoing debate. We're currently discussing this amongst ourselves, as it were, because you're right. That's the difference as to whether. So dragons are fascinating because they appear in every culture across the world at round about the same time, which is just strange from a start. But yeah, 2 legs or 4 legs. The ones in Games of Thrones, you're right, they're 2 legs and a set of wings, which is essentially what a bat is. So a bat is the only genuinely flying mammal. And there's nothing in nature that has 4 legs, 4 legs and hind legs. So 4 individual legs plus wings. Yeah, it just doesn't exist.
Yeah.
And there must be a reason for it.
Yeah. Because that would be effectively 6 legs if you take from bats and
6
chickens.
limbs.
The wings are the 4 limbs. Yeah.
Yeah, and if you look at bats and chickens and everything, the 4 limbs are the wings are the same anatomy as an arm. So they have the same bones, and the bits that hold the wing out in shape are the same as our fingers. So you're looking at something that would have 6 limbs, which doesn't exist, with an internal skeleton. Obviously, you've got insects that have an external skeleton that have multiple limbs, but there is nothing mammalian with 4 limbs and wings, which makes you think, why?
Yeah.
Okay. Having looked into the dynamics of flying of bats, I found it absolutely fascinating that bats have to coordinate their heartbeat, their breathing, and their wing beat. So there must be a size formulation into there as how big something could get that has hearts and lungs and beating wings. And that's the issue, essentially. If you had wings and limbs, and the wings had the same musculature as chicken wings, so they came across with sort of pectoral muscles to the centre of the chest.
Yeah.
You couldn't breathe and beat your wings at the same time. This is the argument that anatomists have, because those muscles would work at the same time. So if you were going to move your wings, you would have to breathe at the same time. But then it would be impossible to beat wings and not have your arms move, and vice versa. If you then moved your arms, your wings would move because the 2 muscles are going over the same set of same anatomy. So we're currently actually exploring the fact that, having been to the recent Harryhausen exhibition, if you look at where he puts the wings on Pegasus, they're not across the chest. He has them lower down. So there's a possibility that might actually work if the wings were lower down and not part of the shoulder girdle, which is where they're normally depicted as being. And there's also interesting, just generally not just dragons, but things with 4 limbs and wings brings in the depiction of angels and demons, which are depicted with wings up on their arms as well, which actually we've got a person up at Dundee College of Art who's looking at the fact that this might have more to do with perspective and the history of painting. And that if we go back far enough, I can't remember the date when the actual picture, but it was around about Leonardo da Vinci's time when perspective came into paintings. And before that, if you put something up in the sky, it was hard to know whether it was far away or whether you actually meant it was flying. And so maybe the depiction of things with wings was maybe pre-perspective times to demonstrate that that person was actually flying. And obviously the concept of heaven being above and things being able to fly up to it had come then. So maybe wings were just an artistic interpretation to identify who it was who was moving up and down through the sky. But yeah, the anatomy of how things could have 4 limbs and fly is a topic that is still going around occasionally. I had a colleague send me a picture the other day of a lizard. Here you go, 4 limbs and wings, but actually it's just bits of skin between the limbs. They don't actively beat their wings.
Yeah. And the other thing, obviously, with dragons is the breathing of flames. I mean, logic says it can't be done, but they all do it in the movies and so on. And, we see people who do fire eaters and the like of that. So Where does that idea stem from?
I have absolutely no idea. I mean, you could see that things like Komodo dragons and these sorts of things, they have forked tongues.
Mm-hmm.
So you could see if you had a description of somebody who said, "Oh, something forked came out of its mouth."
Yeah.
Maybe that's, somebody's then translated that as, "Well, that must have been flames." It's sort of grasping at straws as to where it could possibly come from, isn't it? I mean, you do get things. They tend to be insects, to be fair, that spit out chemicals.
Mm-hmm.
Venom and these sorts of things. It's kind of hard to see how, even if you spat out something that could be ignited, that you'd be able to ignite it and not burn yourself.
Yes.
Although you do get, as you said, flamethrowers where they have a mouthful of ethanol or whatever and spit it past a flame. And so appear to breathe fire, but there's the flame there to start with. You'd need a pilot light sort of thing.
Yes.
Yeah. So yeah, that's an interesting one. You think that's got to come down to different interpretations of what people saw as forked things coming out of things' mouths. But
yeah, because I mean, you can see why people might think dragons existed from, the analogy I like to think of is you're a medieval peasant and you dig up a lump of dinosaur. The only learned person around will be the local priest. And he's going to say, that's a dragon, a beast from the Bible of some sort. And again, there's a school of thought that people digging up mammoth bones and things and laying them out incorrectly, that they give way to the idea of giants with just one eye in their head, because there's the large hole where the trunk nostril was breathing air. That give way to cyclopses and things. But I say it's the fire breathing that doesn't, as you say, have any connection with anything known in nature at the moment.
No, and I mean, look at the skeletons they find of pterodactyls and those sorts of things. You could see that you could lay that out and think, that could be a dragon.
Yeah.
But yeah, the fire breathing, I think it's probably, the analogy of retelling the story of the size of the fish that you caught, But
yeah,
the more you tell it, the more horrendous you want to make this beast that you uncovered, and therefore it's like, oh, I saw it breathing fire.
Yeah.
It's a bit like, you go back to the Spanish Inquisition and the werewolf and the witch trials. You had people who absolutely swore that they saw this person turn into a wolf. Clearly they didn't.
Yeah.
So yeah, you'll have people that swore they saw it breathe fire.
Yeah. Now, just one point you touched on earlier, where you're talking about insects with their exoskeletons. And that's another thing that we, not so much these days, but certainly in the 1950s, were the giant insects that were always attacking the Earth, usually as a result of radioactive experiments and attack of killer ants and things that are huge. Now, what's the science that says something like an ant can't grow to that size?
I'm not an expert on this, but I think it's probably going to be air supply. So insects don't have lungs and circulatory systems like mammals. So the air comes in through sort of holes in their exoskeletons. So they would need it to be able to diffuse throughout their body to provide the energy to live. So that is probably what dictates the size of an insect.
Yeah.
I would think, and maybe you might even get to the weight of the exoskeleton, because obviously it's got to be able to move that weight around on its legs. The joints must have a limit as to how much they can lift.
Yes. And again, this is heading off into paleontology, and I appreciate this might be outside your area, but how come we nowadays, when it comes to land creatures, there seems to be a limit on the size, nothing really any bigger than an elephant, whereas, we had the huge megafauna of the sort of ice ages and pre-ice ages. giant creatures, and then obviously going further back to dinosaurs, we had truly enormous creatures like Brontosauri and Diplodocus and things. Is there a reason why evolution has turned away from huge creatures?
Again, not an expert, but I think if you look at the size of the things you find in the sea, so the size of the blue whales and those things, you find much bigger things in the sea.
Yeah.
So I wonder whether we have a limit on land creature size purely because of habitat. So back when we had the dinosaurs, we didn't have the majority of the land covered in habitation for humans. So they had these big wide plains in which they could roam and a plentiful source of food. Whereas now we seem to be losing creatures because we're destroying the areas in which they would live. And you can imagine that if anything big was seen in an area of wilderness, it would probably be populated with people trying to kill it fairly quickly.
Yes, exactly. Yes, there's a mysterious creature out there. Let's hunt it down and kill it and stuff it. Yes, always makes my heart sink when I see posts about people looking for Sasquatch and Bigfoot. We got to shoot ourselves one. No, it's that's the last thing you should be doing if it is a survival. Let's hunt Nessie out and drag it up on the pier. Yeah. Right. What turning to the future, are you and your colleagues investigating on a purely social as opposed to seriously academic any other fantasy creatures? Anything else taken your fancy? We've had zombies, dragons, and werewolves.
Zombie. Well, at the moment we haven't actually written anything up on dragons. We are looking at the flying things and how that possibly could work. And if you come up with a reason why it could work, then why hasn't it? Sort of thing. So that's it at the moment. I am actually during lockdown. One of these box set frenzies that you do. I'm currently rewatching all of Buffy the Vampire Slayer, which has sparked a sort of, I want to say an interest, but it's like, why are there so many stories about vampires? And why are we so fascinated by them?
Yes,
which is an interesting, because also the fact that I was watching something the other day where it's this battle between good and evil, but actually it's slightly more subtle than that because it's not even just good; it's Christian good.
Yeah.
They're warded off by crucifixes, but not by any other religious objects. So you feel that maybe the whole thing was a product of the church to keep people in line. But
yes. What do you do if you are in a non-Christian area and you're plagued by vampires?
It was a comment of that in the series where one of the Jewish characters was having to put crucifixes up throughout their house, saying, "I'm really not sure this is a good way to go."
Yeah, but I mean, again, vampires, blood-sucking creatures of the night, are very ancient in human folklore. And again, quite widely spread through different cultures. So there's clearly something there.
Yeah, it's interesting that all these different cultures are making up the same thing. The assumption obviously there is they are making it up, but I mean the fact that they're all making up exactly the same thing is interesting.
Yeah, and particularly going way back, there was no possibility of any cross-fertilization of ideas and stories. There was no internet in 2,000 years ago for people to say, "Hey, look at my werewolf meme." They were sort of independently sprung up on different continents.
It is, particularly dragons, because they appear quite quickly in very distant places. They're suddenly mentioned all over the place. It is an interesting area in which to look, because you do, how to word this, you do come across people who absolutely believe in these things. Therefore, you want to be kind of respectful to their beliefs whilst you're also trying to look to disprove everything.
Yes.
It's
Yeah, I know what you mean.
tricky.
Yes. Yeah, yeah. Anyway, Janet, thank you ever so much for your time. That
No
was
problem.
very interesting. It's nice to have a scientific perspective on the viability of these things, never mind whether or not they actually exist, but could they function, which I think is the key thing.
Well, it's interesting. I was talking to somebody about the fact that the article on the werewolves had been published, and that they did at the end of the conversation go, "Yeah, but they're not real, are they? Right?"
It's when people say that, right, you're thinking they're just a little bit worried that they might be real. There's a little bit of worry in their voice there. Yes, that's wonderful. Anyway, Janet, thank you ever so much indeed for your time, and enjoy the rest of your day.
Okay, thank you very much.
Once again, a big thank you to this week's guest, Janet Philp. You can find more on Anatomy Nights by checking out the website www.anatomynights.com. As ever, there are live links to Janet's website, her Amazon Books page, and social media on the urbanfantasist.com website, in the podcast metadata, and on our YouTube channel at youtube.com/c/Weird Tales Show. You'll also find a link to a talk Janet gave on the neuroscience of zombies. Apparently the reasons why zombies attack people they knew in life is because temporal lobe damage in the brain causes a condition called prosopagnosia, meaning they have a difficulty in recognizing faces. And by way of a footnote to Janet Philp's interview, the latest edition of the Fortean Times contains details of a recent werewolf panic in Nigeria, when a video showing the corpse of a dead werewolf, complete with a voiceover in the local Hausa language, saying that it had been killed by the Nigerian military, went viral on social media. Fortunately, a number of fact-checking services were able to debunk the story by doing a reverse image search on the stills from the video. It turns out it was actually a clip from a Portuguese horror short called Lobisomem Mortos a Tiros, or Werewolf Shot Dead. The werewolf model in the movie was created by special effects sculptor Joseph Rob Kubaski, who can be seen found online posing with the wolf. Naturally, you can also find a link to the video on our website. And equally naturally, the revelation the film clip was fake has not stopped further rumours that it was actually a real wolf that was hunted down and killed in Pakistan when it disturbed a picnic party. Yes, a picnic party. I can only assume they take Kalashnikovs along with all the food and drink when they go picnicking in Pakistan.
Hey guys, news! The title is Shuckland, and it's a brand new book by Charles Christian. It takes you on a journey through the weird wonders and intriguing mysteries of the Waveney Valley. Explore with Charles the truth behind the notorious Black Shuck of the book's title. Be transported to a world of demonic entities, murderous earls, ley lines, witchcraft, paganism, and discover the facts behind the outrageous legends and folklore of this seemingly peaceful corner of England. Shuckland is a 200-page illustrated paperback available through bookshops and online via Amazon and Books Etc., as well as the Urban Fantasist website at www.urbanfantasist.com. Shuckland is priced at $12.95, and there's an ebook version available on Amazon priced just £3.25. Shuckland, get yours today.
We have a Friday the 13th coinciding with this week's show, and appropriately enough, we have a ghost story that is set to walk every 13th of August. The location is the Pilchard Inn, a pub on Burgh Island in Devon. Now, Burgh Island is an interesting place in its own right, as it can be reached at low tide by walking across a strip of sand, but at high tide you need either a boat or to take a lift on the island's sand tractor, which is a kind of mini open-top bus on stilts, but with wheels. Obviously not stilts like some kind of imperial walker from the Star Wars movies. Anyway, the main attraction on the island is the Art Deco Hotel, which was used by the crime writer Agatha Christie for the setting of 2 of her detective stories, And Then There Were None and the Hercule Poirot mystery Evil Under the Sun. However, it is not the hotel that is haunted, but the pub, which is said to date back to as long ago as the 14th century, when it was used as a refuge by fishermen fishing for pilchards. According to legend, in later years the island became the home of smugglers and pirates, including a character called Crocker, who may at one time even been the landlord of the Pilchard Inn. Sometime in the 18th century he met his match when he was shot dead in a fight on the 13th of August with either a rival gang of smugglers or customs officers. Apparently today you can buy a baguette and pint at the Pilchard Inn, the baguette being something that would definitely have not been on the menu in the pub in Crocker's day. Incidentally, fans of swinging 60s pop trivia might like to note that Burgh Island and its sand tractor were the setting for the final scene in the 1965 movie Catch As If You Can, featuring the Dave Clark Five, a band that at one time was rated as the main rivals to the Beatles.
Good day, gentlefolk. I doth have breaking news. Your Weird Tales host, Charles Christian, has written a new book called Saints and Sinners in Dark Age England. 5 shocking true tales that are stranger than fiction. There's murder, mayhem, treason, incest, adultery, and worse. Read about the real antics of 9 saints. Yes, saints. 8 kings and 5 queens of England, plus the wickedest of all stepmothers. And be amazed, or horrified, or appalled, or all 3. If you love weird history, and methinks you do, hop over to Amazon for your copy of Charles Christian's Saints and Sinners in Dark Age England. Grab yours now.
And that's almost it, but before we go, one last story. There's been a lot of coverage in the media in recent weeks about the Pentagon report on UFOs, or UAPs, unidentified aerial phenomenon. But there's been no further clarification on whether some of these things are actually extraterrestrial in origin. But relax, we have an answer to the mysteries of the universe, thanks to Delia Smith. That's Delia Smith, the English celebrity chef and author, and joint owner of the Norwich City Football Club. Delia has now diversified into writing books about personal wellness and the meaning of life. Anyway, Delia, in her latest book, has ruled out the existence of aliens, insisting us humans are the only known intelligent beings in the universe. Says Delia, human life, what is it? Why is it? We've got this immense universe. It takes I don't know how many billions of years for light to reach this tiny little planet, yet it has human life, the only life we know in the universe. Not only does it have human life, but everything in the universe is there to bring that life about and sustain it. Well, I'm glad that's sorted out. Although I think when it comes to the meaning of life, I still prefer the solution given in the Hitch Hikers' Guide to the Universe.
Many millions of years ago, a race of hyper-intelligent, pan-dimensional beings got so fed up with the constant bickering about the meaning of life that they commissioned 2 of their brightest and best to design and build a stupendous supercomputer to calculate the answer to life, the universe, and everything.
Oh, deep thought. We want you to tell us the answer.
The answer to what?
The answer to life, the universe, everything. We'd really like an answer. Something simple.
I have to think about that. Return to this place in exactly 7.5 million years.
Is it finished? No, there's more. There's more. They go back.
What, 7.5 million years later?
That's right. They do.
Deep thoughts. Do you have
An
a...
answer for you? Yes, but you're not going to like it.
It doesn't matter, we must know it.
All right. The answer to the ultimate question of life, the universe, and everything is... "42.
42?
Yes, I thought it over quite thoroughly. It is, it's 42. It would have been simpler, of course, to have known what the actual question was.
But it was the question. The ultimate question. Of everything.
That's not a question. Only when you know the question will you know what the answer means.
Give us the ultimate question then.
I can't. But there is one who can. A computer that will calculate the ultimate question. A computer of such infinite complexity that life itself will form part of its operational matrix. And you yourselves shall take on new, more primitive forms and go down into the computer to navigate its 10 million year program. I shall design this computer for you, and it shall be called...
Now it just remains for me to say this is Charles Christian saying thank you so much for listening in. Please join me again next week for more strange tales for strange times. Until then, stay well, stay weird. Goodbye.
Black Shuck, the demon dog of East Anglia, is baying at the moon, which means it's time for us to go. You've been listening to the Weird Tales radio show with Charles Christian, your weekly fix of ghost stories, urban myths, witchcraft, folklore, and the paranormal. You can keep in touch with us online at www.urbanfantasist.com, by email to urbanfantasist@icloud.com, and on Twitter @urbanfantasist. Join us again next week for another edition of the Weird Tales radio show. Goodbye.